Morning, everyone. Hi, hope you're all okay. Plan for this stream is I'm going to go through the topic of St Augustine. So hopefully you've done okay going through some of this material on your own. This one's been very much self-taught, so I'm going to hopefully fill in some gaps for you on this topic and then answer any questions that you might have. So luckily with St Augustine, it's a fairly straightforward topic because we know him. We've covered him before. We've done him in Problem of Evil. It's exactly the same St Augustine. So let's set the scene before we enter St Augustine. So in Rome, it was not a Christian country. It wasn't a Christian place, and Christians were persecuted. However, when Emperor Constantine came in, he was the one that actually brought Christianity back into the Roman Empire. So he was the one that brought Rome back in, and brought it back into Rome. And so what Constantine did was he made Christians powerful and wealthy. He made it okay to be a Christian again. But the thing about Emperor Constantine was he was extremely religiously tolerant, very, very tolerant of different religions and different faiths, different understandings. And so that was the scene that Augustine was brought up and born into. So at this point, we'll bring Augustine into the mix. So Augustine was born in AD 354. So Emperor Constantine, had been in the reign for a while, and this it established his ruling that Christianity was okay. So Augustine was born into that time to an extremely devout Christian mother, Mother Monica. We'll come back to Mother Monica soon. And for St Augustine, he through the early years of his life, through the early stages of his life, was quite rambunctious. He was quite someone that enjoyed the pleasures. He was quite just a normal teenager. He didn't necessarily want to do any work. He just wanted to have an easy life. He wanted to be able to just do his own thing. Unfortunately, Augustine was extremely intelligent. So it meant that things always came back to him. So it meant that he was always recognized for having some brilliance, even though he was from a very, very poor family. And so he did become a teacher. And so he looked to different people for inspiration. And so one group that he first of all kind of attached himself to, because he didn't really see his mother's religious understanding. He didn't really go down Christianity immediately, and he recognized the importance of it, but he thought he wanted to dabble in other things. So he dabbled with a group called the Manichees. So the Manichees were a group that believed in like this cosmic battle between good and evil. And they believed that the soul of light was trapped in the world of darkness. So very, very Platonic. And then he started to have a look at someone else as well called Plotinus. So Plotinus was a Neoplatonist, but Plotinus differently argued that actually there wasn't a cosmic battle between good and evil. It was the idea that actually there was only goodness, the form of goodness. And so again, very, very much based on Plato. There's the form of the good. And from this, Augustine started to develop his idea that actually evil is a lack of goodness. Evil is therefore not something, it's not a substance, it's not something that you can create. So he got those ideas from Plotinus. But for Augustine, he still wasn't happy. He still wasn't happy with Plotinus, and certainly not the Manichees now. And why? Because he said, well, what about Jesus? Where does Jesus come into the mix? If we can find everything through the form of the good and we can work it all out and evil is not a substance, then there's no need for Jesus at all. So at this point, he went back to Christian roots. He went back to it, and he actually was inspired by seeing St Ambrose speak. So when he saw St Ambrose, he thought, there's something here. So it was St Ambrose and it was St Paul that really brought him back firmly to Christianity. And actually, it made him establish three main views. The three main views that he established is that human reason alone is not good enough. Human reason does not work, and that we need Jesus. The second is that it's God's grace that will save us. We need the grace of God. And third And final, that we shouldn't focus on our bodily pleasures. And so we shouldn't focus on bodily pleasures, but more our spirituality. So, as we've said, just to summarize so far, Emperor Constantine did bring Christianity back. In comes Augustine into a time of religious tolerance. He first of all turns to the Manichees, but he does not agree with them because of this idea that of evil and goodness. He says no, there's something more there. Yes, Jesus is a role model, but it's more. So then he goes to Plotinus. Plotinus as well was very, very negative about the body, very Platonic in that sense as well, but he said no, there's still something missing. And then this led him to this idea of St Ambrose and St Paul. So then this is kind of the establishment of where St Augustine came from. At this time, when St Augustine turned back to Christianity, he had a mistress. He'd been with a mistress for many, many years. He had a son. I think, well, I might have had a child. I don't know if it was a son or not. But he had a child with this mistress. So he'd been with this woman a very long time. And then this is when his mother came into the mix. And she said, no, Augustine, now you are back to being a Christian. You are not having a mistress. You have to get married. The other issue is that once Augustine refound his faith, so refound Christianity, he became a priest and then went up to be a bishop as well, against his own will. He did not want to become a bishop because it would cause more work, but his actual congregation said, we want you to become a bishop because bishops have more power. So again, he had to go along with everybody else. His mother was getting in his ear saying, you can't have a mistress, leave your mistress, marry this other woman instead. And this other woman happened to be, I believe someone that was pretty young. And Augustine went, no, get rid of the mistress, but I'm going to go celibate. I am not going to marry a child. I'm not going to marry a young woman. And so at this point, this is when Augustine's understanding of sexuality and women starts to evolve. And so for Augustine, he thought, no, I'm not going to get married. I will get rid of the mistress and actually focus on less on bodily pleasures, less on having fun, and more on my spirituality. So from here, his good old days of fine living and sexual freedom were over. He believed that these were a barrier to spirituality, that you would never become spiritually pure by following those paths. He also said that and this is where it becomes quite interesting, he didn't take a leaf out of Emperor Constantine's book. He actually said, and he went about destroying places of non-Christian worship. So he destroyed anywhere that wasn't Christian. He also persecuted any heretics, anybody that was not Christian. He persecuted them. So he actually sought out people that were Christian, that were following their own religious beliefs, whatever it might have been, and he put a stop to them because he had the power to do that with him being now a bishop. And so at this point, we're painting a picture of what Augustine was starting to become. As far as his views towards women, towards sexuality, and this idea of pleasure not being a good thing. We then come into the 4 sections. Now, I know this is where you can't see my board very good, but there is a picture online, and I did try and put it up with a few books. So this is when we go into the 4 sections of his argument, starting with this idea of before and after the fall. So we all know what the fall is, the eating of the apple, breaking the covenant and the promise with God that they wouldn't eat from the tree of good and evil, that they corrupted and destroyed his perfect paradise. We know all of that from Problem of Evil. But Augustine, and the topic of St Augustine, takes it slightly further. So it's the idea that before the fall, before the eating of the apple, etc. Should have had an apple, shouldn't I? Before the eating of the apple, everything was in a state of concordia. Utter perfection, state of perfection, utter bliss. Adam and Eve were, God was quiet for Adam and Eve to, do what they wanted to do. It was a time of happiness, sexual freedom for them two. Obviously, there was only them two anyway, but it was the idea that they could do whatever they wanted to. And it was just calm and easy and happy. And it was just utter perfection. One bite of an apple and it all goes wrong. And so this idea there that once they'd eaten the apple, once they broke that promise and broke that covenant, it was then only God's grace, and I'll come back to God's grace in a second, it is only God's grace that can then save us, that can then help us. And so this moves us then into into love. There are two types of love: bad love, good love. Bad love is this idea of cupiditas. I always think of it like Cupid bad. So cupiditas, this idea of after material possessions, bodily, sexual pleasures, bad. And so that's what was brought in after the fall. Whereas the good kind of love is caritas. This is the Latin taken from the Greek of agape. So it's very much like agape. And this is the idea that it's the love of others. It expresses God's will. Virtue, spiritual happiness, and we are driven by love. And so you can be driven towards the right or the wrong type of love. And you've guessed it, after the fall, we go to the wrong love. We go to the materialistic, bodily pleasures, selfish love. So if you remember back from the topic of problem of evil, we had a look at these ideas of why are we still being punished today? If Adam and Eve did it, well, go punish them, crack on. Why us? And this idea that we're seminally present with the bloodline of Adam and Eve. And so it's not just that we are the bloodline. We inherit now original sin. Interesting that the whole point of baptism is to remove original sin, but anyway, Augustine seems to forget about baptism. But it's the idea that we are born now with with original sin. We have got this through Adam and Eve and from Adam and Eve, and so it's the idea that all humans are sinful. We are born that way. We are born with sin. So we are born tabula rasa. We're not born. We are not born blank slates. We are born with this original sin within us. We are born into a state of ignorance. We are completely beyond rescue unless God's grace shines upon us and we turn to Jesus through the Holy Spirit, etc. So this idea now that we cannot be saved. We can only be saved if God actually shines a light onto us. And finally, after the fall, we are corrupted. So we are always inclined to do wrong before we do right or before we do good. So we're always inclined to the cupiditas rather than the caritas. And that concordia, totally gone thanks to that good old apple. Finally, then, sexuality. Concupiscence is this idea of living in a state of sexual desire, and lust for material possessions, etc. So again, Augustine did promote celibacy. He said, once you're married, once you've had your children, then again, commit to celibacy. Be celibate. You should only get married to have children. You shouldn't be having sex to have children. Anything else, no, you should be celibate. So basically, he's saying, I'm celibate, so everybody else should be. That's pretty much what he's saying in a nutshell. I can't be with my mistress, so neither can you. And so he also mentions this idea about women. He says women are made equally, but we are passive. So he says women are passive. He wouldn't even, he did still have little soirees at his house. He wouldn't even let his own sister come to his soirees. I don't know what he was expecting to do with his sister or how much temptation his sister would be, but he wouldn't even invite his sister there. So he was very, very closed off when it came to that relationship with women. And finally, Ecclesia is this idea of a heavenly society. So through the grace of God, again, through God's grace, hopefully we can one day enter Ecclesia, which is this heavenly society, obviously, when we die. So a final couple of bits, and then I'll see if you've got any questions, because this is the quickest I've ever taught this topic, is this idea of what is God's grace. Now, I gave you a worksheet with some rundowns of different words. It's just about remembering them, so put them into your own words. But God's grace, because God's grace comes as a theme throughout now quite often, is basically God's loving kindness. God's grace is God shining a light on you. It's God choosing and selecting you. So basically, no matter how kind you are, how much reason you use, what you do in your life, if God doesn't elect you through the grace of himself, you won't go to heaven. So it doesn't matter what you do, if God's grace isn't shone upon you, then it doesn't matter. And so you either get it or you don't. So the grace of God is this idea that you're a chosen one, basically. So it's the idea of God's love is shone upon you and you have been selected by God. That's pretty much it. The final part then, of course, is the pair. The pair comes in somewhere into the PowerPoint, but basically Augustine says the reason why we always choose wrong over right is because one time he was quite full. He had lots of food. He wasn't hungry, but he saw a pear tree in someone else's garden, and he went and took a pear and ate it. And he said that therefore we're all inclined to do wrong because we're just greedy and selfish. And because of him taking this pear, which we don't even know if it's a true story or not, we are all inclined to do wrong than right. I don't know what the focus on fruit is within Christianity, and I don't know if he is actually making a link between the taking of the apple and the taking of the pear, but that's Augustine and his pear. And that's why on the front of Augustine's autobiography, the Confessions, there is actually a man kind of under a pear tree. And so that's where all that comes from. All right, so that's pretty much the Augustine topic in a nutshell. That was a very, very quick run through, just over 15 minutes. That's pretty impressive to go through a week's worth of information. Obviously, this has been extremely quick, but I'm hoping that I've filled in a few blanks. So now is the time that if you have questions, what parts of the topic did you not get? What do you need more help with? What don't you understand? So now's the time to ask any questions that you've got. If you don't have any questions, that's great. When it comes to the exam, you could get a question on any part of this. So you could get a question about critically assess Augustine before and after the fall. Now, when it comes to the Christian thought topics, obviously quite a considerable amount of these you're probably going to have to do on your own. And obviously I'll keep doing these, the streams after the topic just to make sure I'm filling the blanks and answer your questions. But with a lot of the Christian thought topics, it's more information, it's more detail, it's more remembering different names, different arguments. So whereas philosophy, you've got to understand kind of concepts and evaluate the logicalness of them concepts. Ethics is applying it into putting yourself in someone else's shoes, so to speak. This is very much just learn the information, and as we go through the topics, it will become easier to be able to evaluate them as well, because you'll be able to use other people against each other. But the easiest way to evaluate is, again, use the same evaluation in Problem of Evil. What about evolution? Is it still fair? What about baptism? Does that not take away original sin? And this idea of are we always inclined to do bad over good? Well, Aquinas says actually with the synderesis, we actually do good before we do bad. Who is more convincing? So very, very quickly you can evaluate these people. And this is purely just like your old school evaluation, strengths and weaknesses. Does it work or not? Do you believe this? If you don't believe it, then that's your line of argument. Why don't you believe it? What parts do not work? So it's actually very, very simple to get very good marks with these. You've just got to keep with them, because again, these topics are very different from the ones that we've done so far together. All right, folks. So The plan is that at some point I will send to your emails a timetable for the next feed. So I will not do one next week, but then the first Monday back, so Monday the 20th, I will do one on death and afterlife. So you need to keep going with your death and afterlife, and I will do then one on Monday. And then every Monday after that, I will do the topic. So death and afterlife, and then I will be doing natural and revealed theology, etc. So each week you just work through the topic, work through the sheets, etc., and then I will and I'll send you them obviously as each week comes, and then I'll do one of these. I might try and do it where I talk through a PowerPoint, but to be honest with you, this worked quite fine for me this week, so hopefully it worked for you. So final call, any questions, problems, issues, anything general that you're finding tricky, anything I can help with? And of course, you can always email me. All right, folks. Well, I hope you have found this useful. I hope I've been able to fill in a few little blanks and go through information. And hopefully you've sat there thinking, yep, I've got this. I get that. That's fine. No issues there. And I've just been able to kind of glue it all together for you. So take care of yourself, everybody. Enjoy your Easter. And this is summer then. Enjoy your Easter. Obviously, just stay safe, everyone. Oh, thanks, guys. Oh, great. That's really, really good. And yeah, go and eat lots of chocolate Easter eggs. So go and obviously when Easter comes. So enjoy yourself, enjoy your holiday, and I'll see you all soon. Bye, guys. Bye, everyone.